Hello and welcome back to the Pharmaverse Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pietrack. If you're a leader or an aspiring leader in the pharmaceutical industry, well, then you found the right podcast, because we interview the brightest stars from all the corners of the pharma universe, and today's guest would certainly fit that description. I'm joined by John Lepore, a distinguished physician scientist who is the CEO at ProFound Therapeutics, part of the flagship pioneering family of companies. And we're going to be discussing leadership principles, career management insights, and how your passions can drive performance. So, John Lepore, welcome to the Pharmaverse.
Terrific to be here, Michael. Really excited to engage about what we're doing in the company, and some of your leadership questions should be really a lot of fun.
Well, John, I've been looking forward to this since our last conversation, and just can't wait to learn more about ProFound Therapeutics. Tell us what you guys are doing there and what you're developing.
ProFound Therapeutics is a biotech company here in Boston that's got a really exciting mission, which is essentially to open up a completely novel pool of drug targets. And everyone working in the space will know that finding tractable, completely novel targets that get you to a first-in-class medicine is increasingly difficult. And it's something like 50 or 80% of all targets are worked on by 4 or 5 companies. It's because it's just challenging. That's a problem I was acutely aware of in my prior role in Big Pharma. I suppose we'll get to that at some point. Yep. And I really took some risk in jumping into a new co to take a stab at redefining a pool. And what we're doing is using a very specific technology that allows us to query cells and identify every single protein that's expressed in the cell, whether or not it's been described before.
Wow.
And it turns out there are tens of thousands of proteins that were underappreciated before because they don't follow strictly the rules that were set up 20 years ago or so when the Human Genome Project was done. And if you bend some of those rules and you ask in an unbiased way, are there more proteins in cells? It's a resounding yes. And there are thousands of them. And, the rest of the company is focused on how do we find them, but also how do we start to characterize them as potential new proteins as drugs or proteins as drug targets. And we've already signed 4 different agreements. Several of them are publicly announced already. One in 2024 was with Pfizer, together with Pioneering Medicines here at Flagship, where we're identifying novel proteins that regulate obesity-related phenotypes. We just announced a few weeks back a very exciting collaboration with Novartis, where we're looking at targets relevant to cardiovascular disease. Mm-hmm. And then we're about to announce, it's not public yet, but a large pharma where we're doing work in respiratory and immunology together.
Oh, awesome.
So, this is part of our strategy.
That's great. Okay, so you're developing, ProFound Therapeutics, you're developing your own therapeutics, but you're also unveiling some of your findings to other pharma companies, all for the benefit of patients.
Totally. Spot on. You could do my pitch next time.
Well, it's touching because the patients really what everybody's trying to benefit, who they're trying to benefit. It's not, hey, let's hoard all this information and let's take over the pharmaceutical industry. It's like, no, let's share and let's partner and let's help patients.
In the sort of lore of small company strategy, there's an adage about, always keep your first program because you need the value, and keep as many as you could for as long as you could. I think that makes sense in some circumstances, particularly where the company is likely going to have a relatively small number of assets. You've got to be really careful about how much value you give away in a partnership versus keep within the company. We're in a just incredibly fortunate circumstance of likely having a lot of different programs. So for us, partnering is a key way of developing value, because there's no way as a small company we're going to be able to prosecute across this broad breadth all by ourselves. So strategically, we're partnering with pharma to really tap into their expertise and their money and their capabilities and just advance, a broader set of things while keeping some internal.
Really, I mean, flagship pioneering is just the gold standard in my books. And it isn't there a mantra there, like trust your crazy ideas or pursue your
Yeah,
crazy?
exactly. I have a t-shirt somewhere. I should have worn it probably.
Yeah, trust your crazy ideas. And that's really, I mean, think about that. Everybody says there's these many proteins. You're like, well, I have an idea that maybe I'm just going to go see if there's more, and walking into that. And it sounds like it could be very big. I also saw a video that you did where you were talking about a friend of yours, another physician. I would love for you to sort of tell that story too, because it was so touching. I'm sitting there watching it, had never met you, and I'm like tearing up. Do you mind telling that story?
Yeah, maybe I'll tear up a little bit less than I think I did in that video, or at least
Yeah.
that I felt, because that was just a few weeks after I had joined Flagship and joined ProFound, and a very dear friend, medical school classmate and roommate, had passed away. But from a blood cancer that couldn't even put a name on it. It was some complicated, undefined blood cancer that moved very quickly. And, before he passed, we had a lot of conversations about, where science is in, I guess it was 2024 at the time. We should be able to understand what are the causes of that and be able to address them. And it was just so frustrating, certainly for him as the patient and for me as a friend, to just not know what the drug targets were or how to attack that particular disease. And, that just helped me think about doubling down on like, what could I really discover and develop and, not have more people in such a situation.
Yeah, I want to brag on you for a second. I mean, not only are you an MD, but you're an MD from Harvard Medical School. You're the Howard Hughes Medical Institute research scholar. And then you go into clinical practice. Then you transition to GSK. You're now the SVP heading up all of research at this large pharma company. All of that's super impressive. So here's the question. How difficult has it been for you to lead a company as the CEO versus leading the research itself?
First of all, you must have talked to my mom, because there's two of you who are supporting my career or something. So
I have a good research team. I'll just say that.
Yeah, thanks for talking to her. Look, it's different. We have just about 40 people now. It's decidedly smaller. It's decidedly smaller budget.
Yep.
And there are things that come with that that are decidedly different from being in a large pharma company. I'd say my eyes were fairly wide open, having seen and worked with a lot of small companies before. And having had, quite a few friends, colleagues who came to companies like this. But it's also different to really live those changes as opposed to hear about them. And I'd say, first off, I've already mentioned, you don't have as many zeros on the budget. So that defines what you can't do sometimes. Yeah. A big one was when you're in a big company, particularly if you have the good fortune of being in a leadership role, there are thousands of people to call on. And at GSK, if there were this particular science program, I could tell you the name of the person who has done that for 15 years and call her or him and get the answer. When you're a small company, that person's no longer there. Yeah. And you're like, oh, wait, now how am I going to answer that? Yeah. So there's an element of having to sort of find expertise and really be open to going external to your company and getting the best advice. And then there's, I'd say even more imperative to focus.
Yeah.
Small company early on, runways are by definition short, and you got to be ready to get in things and get out of them quickly.
Yeah.
Because you don't have a lot of time to sort of fail. So those are some of the elements.
Well, I guess the heart of my question is, there are leaders that are amazing at their job, sometimes as an individual contributor. Then they're put into a leadership job and they have to almost let go of what made them great in order to be great at something else. And sometimes that letting go is very difficult. How have you gotten through that?
It's a really good question. I mean, I guess I've lived, it's kind of like two sides of that curve. One was, sort of as I was getting more responsibility within a company, that's when you have to make some really tough decisions about really no longer being an expert scientifically in the field. So I'm a cardiovascular physician scientist. At the onset of my career in pharma, I was working in cardiovascular science. So I was a subject matter expert. But then over time, I became responsible for other areas. And, the trap is to try to be an expert and act as if you're expert in those other areas. Actually, you're not. You need to be the expert at supervising people who are expert in those areas and really knowing the difference between those two and, helping people develop and grow and deliver without you being the one that's doing it. So that was a learning curve on that end. This end is almost the other way around where, you could ask someone else to give you the view, but I think I was reasonably good at managing a large organization. But now I'm stepping to something smaller where it's not about keeping a lot of things afloat. It's about focus and delivery in one vertical. And I had to relearn some of those skills too.
Well, this is the second time you brought up focus. I want to talk more about that because I think the leader's job is to help the whole company, in your case, but a team maybe, to stay focused on the mission. And I know when we spoke last time, you were talking a lot about urgency and making sure the team stays, in a heightened urgency state of mind. How are those things related, urgency and focus?
Well, step one, and you sort of alluded to it, but underlying all of that is clarity on the mission. And that's 70% of the CEO's job is to just be really clear about what are we trying to achieve and in what timeline. And my experience is you need to repeat that 4 times a day. And it's not just like an email. It's what we have to live, like absolute clarity on what are we trying to achieve here. Because then the rest flows a little bit. When it's clear what the goals are, then it's that much easier to be specific and deliberate about, each individual's objectives that fulfill that goal. So there's a clarity on mission. And then there's, it's a bit about ensuring accountability and demanding, accountability. So, when we say we're going to do something, I expect it's going to be done. And sure, stuff happens and it can't be done that way. But then I want to hear, well, it's because of X, Y, and Z, and here's the solution, and we've solved it. And, I think it's so much more acute in a small company, particularly in the present environment, which I'm sure we'll come up on, that clarity what the mission is, clarity on what each person is doing, and accountability for actually delivering it.
The Pharmaverse podcast is a leadership podcast. So I want to circle back to career pivot points in your career, because the aspiring leaders that are listening, they're at a pivot point. What risk should I take? And they have ideas, crazy ideas about their career. And so I wanted to talk about the pivot points in your career, because when we spoke last time, it seemed like there were a lot of them. Maybe, leaving clinical practice. I'll let you talk, but what were those big pivot points?
As you get farther in career, you have an opportunity, obviously, to learn about things and probably in many cases be able to afford more risk than you might when you're junior. I'm not sure if that's the right answer or not. And I think, I've had friends and colleagues who've taken bigger risks earlier than maybe I did. But this is a very individual thing about, what each person's risk threshold is and how much they like what they're doing.
Yeah, what their why is, right?
I think some people start out in something, absolutely love it. They do it for 50 years and it's just fabulous. It was great. My dad was a high school French teacher. He taught for like 35 years and loved every minute of it and never aspired to do something. He didn't think of it as, what's career progression? It was like, that's what I do. It's individual. For me, as I mentioned earlier, I was always driven by a fascination with science, disease mechanism, and where is it that I could have a big impact on applying them in a big way. I spent some time seeing patients, which I really loved. I mean, enormous privilege. great emotional strength you get out of that, and it's an emotional cost too. It's not easy.
Whew.
But I realized, like, for me, doing that every day for 35 years wasn't going to be what really excited me, and also where I probably wasn't going to have the biggest impact. That was my impression. And so early on, I decided to work in science. I spent a fair amount of time doing postdoctoral training. I had a laboratory for a while at the University of Pennsylvania, and I was doing really basic science, transcriptional regulation of cardiovascular development. Really cool, important, disease relevant, but it was far from patients for me. It was too far. I went too far the other way.
Yep.
So that's when I thought, well, okay, I want to pivot more towards something in the translational realm. And good career decisions require good mentors and advisors.
Well put.
And maybe he'll be listening, or I'll send them a link. Some of your viewers might know Perry Neeson.
Neeson.
Yeah, who was a really informative person in my career. He called me up. He said, look, John, you need to come work for a pharma company, because I think your skills could really help us drive how we think translationally about drug targets and, like, practically apply them. So the first call, I said, okay, stop bothering me, not interested. But a year or two later, I took my first job at GSK working in his department, and that's how I made that big career move. So part of it, what I'm getting at is like what you are comfortable with and what drives you. Part of it is knowing someone who could really give you confidence and advice, and the two together, you make a leap. And I
want to go off on a tangent here. So I'm just trying to picture the conversation when you tell your dad, the French teacher for his whole career, Dad, I want to be a scientist, or I want to go study science. What was that conversation like? Did he think you were going to go follow his footsteps and be a teacher?
That's interesting. No, really, there wasn't any pressure in that direction. I think it was more like, oh my gosh, you just went to school for 27 years and you paid all this money, and, like, I thought you were going to be a cardiologist. Like, what?
Yeah.
I think it was more of that.
Well, back to Perry, what was the biggest leadership or the best advice you ever got from Perry?
We had a discussion somewhere early on about maybe moving into pharma. And then he actually gave me the advice. He said, you know what, having listened to you and knowing you, go back to academia and do a couple more years and test that out and develop a little bit more. And then what happened is, when I did come to GSK, it was like 3 levels above where I would have been in the first place, because he was really thoughtful about what are the skills I might need at that point.
Well, so you've been at the biggest of the big companies, GSK. Now you've been at the smallest of the small, biotech startups. But whether it's a big company or a small company, are the fundamentals of leadership the same, whether you're the CEO or if you're the frontline manager?
How you manage, guide, mentor people is probably different, because there's not a hierarchical structure. There's much more dynamism in how things come and go as projects and how you organize your time. And I think it's a different relationship that has to be, like, almost daily, like with every one of my direct reports. Like, okay, what's changed? How we get a pivot? Mm-hmm. It's not as if, like, let's meet twice a year and go through your plan. Mm-hmm. I think that's a decided difference in a small company versus a big company.
Yeah, it's more like, hey, we got to huddle up before every play versus, let's check back at halftime, Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. One question about establishing company culture. A lot of leaders struggle with this. A lot of people, is there any process that you have that you feel like establishes culture?
Arguably, I think the more influential way of establishing culture is by setting an example or a tone than it is by sort of a slide set with bullets that enumerate what our culture is, and then you sort of teach it.
Yep.
Now, there's value to that, and to be able to clearly articulate what it is and get people behind it and have sort of aide-memoire to sort of reinforce. I get all that for sure. But I think there's a very strong component of people will know what the culture is by the tone you set and by the questions you ask and by the way you respond in certain circumstances. And I find myself very consciously deciding to act in a certain way in response to something because this is the way I want the company to do it.
It's a lot like parenting, if the guy's like, don't smoke, kid, you know, you got to live the culture. You got to be the culture, and if you do that, then your buzzwords that you've put in that you established in some meaning, they come to life and they mean something.
Exactly.
That makes sense. Well, I know we're running short on time. I want to just ask one last question about ProFound Therapeutics. What are some milestones that we should be watching for? What should we be rooting for?
Yeah, look, root for the success of the company because it's tightly aligned to the success of how we can help patients. You should be watching for additional news flow about pharmaceutical collaborations we do. You should be watching over time. We'll be publishing some of our results. And it won't be like years. You'll start to see actual drug projects and drug programs coming through clinical development. It's a very exciting time for the company. And I couldn't be more pleased to be sort of on the ground floor of what I see as really opening up enormous therapeutic opportunity for patients. So it's pretty cool.
Well, John, on behalf of the entire audience, I want to thank you for your time. It's truly a special organization. You're truly a special leader. And I'm glad that we were able to discover you and get a chance to learn more about these first-in-class therapies that you guys are discovering. And thank you so much for being a guest on the Pharmaverse.
It's been terrific, Michael. Absolute pleasure to engage in this way. And, thanks to all of your listenership and for their participation as well.
Well, that wraps up another episode of the Pharmaverse. We have many more incredible leaders lined up for you, so make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single insight. But that's a wrap. See you next time on the Pharmaverse.